We are thrilled to be hosting today's very special program. Moderating today's conversation is writer and social justice activist Letty Cottin Pogrebin. Letty is a founding editor of Ms. Magazine and has served as a Moment columnist for more than 30 years. Her articles and op-eds have appeared in dozens of periodicals, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and The Nation. Letty is the author of 12 books, including Deborah, Golda, and Me, Being Female and Jewish in America, as well as Shonda, a memoir of shame and secrecy. Abigail Pogrebin is the author of the National Jewish Book Award finalist, My Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew, and Stars of David, Prominent Jews Talk About Being Jewish. Abigail has written for The Atlantic, The Forward, and Tablet, and moderates public conversations for the Stryker Center and the Jewish Broadcasting Service. Rabbi Dov Linzer is the president and Rosh HaYeshiva, rabbinic head of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, an Orthodox rabbinical school and Torah center which promotes a more open and inclusive orthodoxy. He has written for the Forward, Tablet, and the New York Times, and has hosted highly popular Torah podcasts. Abigail and Dov are the co-authors of the new book, It Takes Two to Torah, an Orthodox rabbi and Reform journalist discuss and debate their way through the 5 books of Moses. Please welcome Letty Cottin Pogrebin, Abigail Pogrebin, and Rabbi Dov Linzer.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, great to be here.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure on 3 levels to be part of this program. One, as Suzanne mentioned, I'm a Moment maven, have been a contributor for almost 35 years to a column that they basically let me say anything I want. And Rabbi Dov Linzer, who I have admired from afar, I have read, I've heard so much about through my daughter Abigail that I at this point feel he is some subdivision of my family. And, and of course, Abigail, my firstborn, who has really walked the path, a long path, and a deeply reasoned and researched and committed path further and deeper into Judaism. So today we're going to touch on a bunch of subjects, but first it has to be said that this is a fantastic book, and I'm going to lead with the bottom line. It's fun to read. It's fun. You laugh. You marvel. You have suddenly these epiphanies about things that are in the Torah that you feel you know so well, that you've heard a million times, that suddenly become fresh. So I want to start with the mechanics, the sort of behind the scenes stuff that writers and publishers know, and maybe everybody listening may not know. And that is that we don't just wake up and say, this is going to be my title. We struggle, we grieve, we have spilkas, we go through many, many incarnations before we end up with the one that you see on our book jacket. So I love this title. It Takes Two to Torah. Love it. I know there was a separate struggle around the subtitle, and this subtitle is terrific. An Orthodox rabbi and Reform journalist discuss and debate their way through the 5 books of Moses. It's just a great title, but it didn't come out of the mouths of babes. So please tell us, were there alternative titles and subtitles that you considered before landing on this one?
Can I start, Dov? Since it's my mom, daughter's prerogative. First of all, thank you. It's great to be with you, Mom. And it's always nice to be interrogated by you. We don't do it a lot. But welcome to Pogrebin Family Therapy with Dov in the middle. But I will say, and you know, Mom, because I ran a lot of these by you, Dov has this hidden skill, which is titles and logos, slogans. So even though he's someone who, started in the womb reading Gemara, studying Gemara, he also could be like an ad salesman or, an ad, what are they from Mad Men, Madison Avenue. Here were some of the ones that we rejected and discussed. And it was its own kind of Talmudic dialogue in rejecting and discussing. Stumbling Towards Sinai, The Odd Couple Talks Torah, Talking Torah 10 minutes at a time. That one was because we wanted people to know this is not a heavy lift. We think it goes deep. We think it's not pediatric Judaism at all, but they are short stints, short bites. So we didn't want people to feel overwhelmed. To and From Sinai. a taste of Torah in small bites, and go and learn, because we all know that Hillel condensed his instruction on what Judaism is, right? Do not do unto your neighbor what you wouldn't do to yourself. Dov, you can correct me, but the rest is Torah. Go and learn it, right? So go and learn. But we can tell you why we rejected those, but Dov came up with the one that we actually landed on. And it was, the minute he said it, it was like the light bulb went off, and people really love it, with a couple of exceptions. And the people who don't like it, let us know.
I'll just add to that it's not that it came to me like suddenly. We went through this whole process, and you know how it works. Like if you're having a brainstorming meeting and you're working out and coming up with ideas, and then it's when you're taking the shower that all of a sudden it hits you. So
you don't want people to imagine you in the shower.
Well, it wasn't the shower. That was a metaphor. Actually, I distinctly remember. I remember I'm driving my car. I was pulling my car into my parking space. I have this image in my head, and I'm going through all of the titles, and it's and it's about two people talking to her, the odd couple, and I'm thinking about two people. It takes two, and I just remember that moment. But Abby, I got to give you credit, because I think my initial suggestion was it takes two to talk Torah, and you wisely dropped the word talk, and Torah became a verb, which it's just such a tighter, punchier title. And I just love the idea of Torah as a verb.
And you've also revealed that you probably know something about the tango.
Well, I will say that one of the people who was not thrilled with the title was my wife. Because she was like, tango, you and Abby. I said, Dvorah, come on.
Okay, before we leave the mechanics, the behind the scenes mechanics, I want to just zero in on the dedication page, because I've always labored in my 12 books over how to dedicate my book appropriately. So did either of you have trouble writing the dedication? And let me just read from the dedication page so people know what you ended up with. Dov, you wrote, for Dvorah, whose warmth, humanity, and deep wisdom sustain and inspire me every day. Did you labor over that, or did that come like a blurb out of your mouth?
No, I mean, it came from just my deepest feelings. And it's so hard writing a dedication. This is my first book. I don't know if you know. And it's like, how do you express in a few words everything you feel for a person that you want to put in a dedication? And, and so on some level, it was like, it's never enough. There's so much more I want to say. But when I really just asked myself, like, what are the most profound qualities that I value in Dvorah and in my wife, I mean, this was just the obvious words that came to mind.
They're lovely words.
Thank you.
Abigail, you wrote about my son-in-law, without whom life would have less color, clarity, fascination, safety, and joy. How'd you come to that?
Dov actually sort of led off with Dvorah, and I would say that for both of us, what really became clear, and through this whole process of talking Torah together, is that we had very patient spouses who really were not just understanding, but cheerleading, and who ultimately are each of our true chevruta, sort of 24/7. And that's 100% sure. I know we're going to get to talk about Dvorah. She's a giant in her own field of scholarship and learning and teaching. But Dave, many people don't know, because he's not in this world at all, is really the person that I talk through every idea, every article, everything I'm working on, and whose take and whose own erudition, frankly, and perspective I really rely on. Not to mention, I'm kind of, as you can all tell, a little bit like intense of a person, and he is very even keel. And so just in so many ways, he's my partner and my pillar in life. And so just both as someone I'm in conversation with, but also someone who kind of keeps me sane. I thought those were the words that I chose.
That's beautiful. And it has the virtue of being true. I've known him for more than 30 years, and he's the world's best husband after your late father.
Thank you.
Well, Letty, if I could just, because I didn't say a word about Dvorah, so I just want to say, that her wisdom has been a through line throughout the marriage. I remember just a few weeks ago, I was advising somebody who gave me a call, and was giving them rabbinic advice. And at the end, they said, "Oh, Rabbi Linzer, thank you so much. You are so wise." And I said, "No, I'm not wise. It's my wife who's wise. I just try my best." So, and but I mean that very sincerely. Just the other night, she was like, both of our kids, our two boys, were going through things, and some of them start with me, but soon realize it's their mother they need to really talk to get the real human wisdom. And some of them by now just know to go straight to Dvorah. And really, there's no way I could have navigated the bumps through this life, let alone this book, without Dvorah by my side.
Okay. Last question about the mechanics. Here is the cover. This is the jacket. Yeah, okay, maybe yours is clear.
Oh, I can go get mine. Whatever.
Everyone can see the painting.
I just want people to see the painting. No test is forthcoming. But I love this painting. And in fact, Abby presented our whole family with a bunch of alternative illustrations, and we all voted for this one. I want to know what is going on in this painting for you, Dov.
Well, what I love about it is there is, first of all, the light from above is that sense of inspiration. Sometimes the picture you have, it seems to be, certainly for me, it's a Mount Sinai picture, but as opposed to Moses with the tablets, the very heavy sense of like law and authority, the light here is about inspiration. And the colors, besides that they're just beautiful, are about like the multifaceted, of the people, of the nation, of the Torah, that sense of plurality, of multiplicity, of color, of warmth, and the focus on the people. Also, all of those are core components for me.
Absolutely get it. By the way, the title given to it by the artist who was Yoram Ra'anan, the title is On the Way to Sinai. You're plugged in. Abby, any difference in your feeling about it?
No, I think you described a lot, but I do think that there's something about the opening. There's like this opening of the sky. And I feel like that's so much how I've experienced the study and the discussion of Torah with Dov, and wherever I've done it, is just things open up. And like that's where sort of the light shines, that where kind of there's a certain kind of awakening that makes me kind of alert, see things differently. And that and then there's kind of like emotion to it in this painting. So I also loved that it didn't feel static.
Right. It to me is a pictorial representation of illumination and epiphany.
Those are good words. Yeah.
Those words and makes them an image. It's beautiful. After you read the book, everybody, you're going to want to frame the cover. It's gorgeous. So you have made reference a couple of times to being the odd couple. When it comes to Chavruta, you certainly are. So how did you end up studying together? Abby, why don't you start?
Yes, I mean, it's maybe not the most exciting story because it starts at a Jewish conference, but and I think we've lost half the audience there. But it was actually a rare Jewish conference because basically it was the Jewish Week. Gary Rosenblatt was the editor at the time. This was back in 2009, and the way that he and his colleagues created the guest list was, it was really kind of the kitchen sink of Jewish thinkers and clergy and writers and not-for-profit heads, and saying, kind of want to gather them all in a bucolic place. We were in Baltimore, and we're just going to kind of eat and talk for 3 days. And the subject matter was guided by all of us. It's this open technology learning. Some of you may have done it, or they just call it open technology, where people put in the ideas that are on their minds, that are keeping them up at night. And then people gravitate towards whatever they want to actually talk about. And Dov and I just kept landing in the same sessions. And I am, as some of you may know, listening to this, I'm a little bit of a rabbi groupie, that when there's somebody who really kind of charges up my thinking and learning, I kind of make a mental note that I want to circle back and maybe interview them for a piece or for something, for a book I'm working on, or even just for guidance kind of offline. And Dov really became one of those people, an advisor, a sounding board. We really struck up a friendship. And, when I say we're oil and water, it may sound like we're that's sort of a negative frame. But it really has to be said how different we are when it comes to how Jewishly we were raised. I loved my upbringing, but it was very home-based Judaism. I did not have a formal Jewish education, and there are reasons for that Mom has written about beautifully. But basically, I learned everything from you, Mom, and I feel like that was a strong grounding, but not so much a formal scaffolding. I didn't learn Hebrew till I went to college and decided it was time to learn it. I didn't read Torah until I had my first child. Like, I was late to all this. Well, Dov prays 3 times a day, has been studying Gemara all his life, teaches it, has basically memorized the Torah and the Talmud. His whole life's work and frankly routine is focused around his faith, frankly, and his sense of obligation. I would say I had more religion in my life the older I got, but it was being driven much more from me as an adult and not from me all the way through. So all that's to say that when we hung out, Dov and I, it wasn't like so easy to go to a restaurant or be at each other's homes. It was much more about ideas. And just to like really fast forward, when I was working on my book, My Jewish Year, where I took a deep dive into every Jewish holiday to really understand its origins, its purpose, its endurance, why it has lasted, all of its rituals, Dov was my last reader. And it was incredibly generous that he sat with that book and basically made sure that Judaism was right. And that became its own chevruta. And when he was writing an op-ed, which I thought was very important for the New York Times, he turned to me to make sure it was accessible, to make sure it was readable. So we really were having this kind of relationship and this partnership offline, informally. And finally, it was Dov's idea to say, we should talk Torah, we should do it out loud, we should sort of bring some of our conversations to others, not just to perform them, but more to invite others to be part of them. And Dov, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. So we did a podcast with the tablet called Parsha in Progress, and that ran over 2 years. We did that every other week. So over the course of 2 years, we covered the whole Parsha, and that was exactly what this book represents. Is it was a conversation. We did not try to cover the whole Parsha. We decided we were going to pick one topic to really hone in on, and we did a little prep work to make sure we had a topic that felt interesting and relevant, so it was a really like just a blast, I would say, over the course of 2 years. It was an opportunity to get out of the walls of the yeshiva and to have these wonderful conversations and to think in new ways and have Abby challenge me in ways that, others would not, either were too afraid to challenge me or didn't, or weren't coming from the same perspective, and me challenge Abby. I really, really looked forward to, to that experience. And then when it was over, it was over. It was 2 years. We had a great time, and I thought, okay, that was a lovely project. Moving on, but we kept on hearing from people, and I think probably even more so Abby heard more of this than I did, about how much they really, people told me how much they loved the podcast, but people would even afterwards be saying a lot to Abby, like, we would love to have it all in one place. It's not, why are you not doing it anymore? Excuse me. And Abby would occasionally say, we should like put it down. We should make it into a book. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like, it wasn't grabbing me. And then finally it was Abby's initiative. And she said, I'm just going to have my nephew transcribe it. So it's really like an all in the family now. Would that be your grandson, Letty?
Yes, it's my grandson.
That's your grandson. There you go. So it's all in the family. So, Abby just like 2 years after the podcast was over, had him transcribe it. And then it's like, oh my God, this reads so well on the page. Like, normally a transcript doesn't carry over well. There's the spoken word and the written word. But we were, I think, both so pleasantly surprised at how engaging and warm and funny, and that there was not a lot of hemming and hawing. It was really, really captured well on the page.
And a very endearing process for us to eavesdrop on. I want to ask Abby, just coming straight out of your backgrounder, which was perfect. Now that you have established the degree of difference, and Dov has established the comfort level, despite the degree of difference. I want to ask you, Abigail, which of the parshiot or the topics that you've discussed together were the most intellectually enlightening for you? And just think of one, and which was the most religiously difficult or emotionally unsettling for you as a Reformed Jew?
As a Reformed Jew, well, I kind of resist the as a Reformed Jew construct. That if you remember from the book, sometimes Dov would say, as a Reformed Jew, what's your thought on this? And I would say, I'm going to answer as a Jew.
I know, but it's the subtitle of
I know that's totally fair pushback, but I'm just not so pro-denomination. So I just want to say we did that for the title because it's important as shorthand that people understand that we come from very different Jewish backgrounds and perspectives, but and frankly, experience and practice, Jewish practice. But given that I've just fought the premise a little bit, I guess I will start with something that I still struggle with to this moment, which is just the fact that Moses never gets to see the promised land. Like that is just, it's hard religiously, it's hard spiritually, it's hard intellectually for me to kind of get my head around that decision by God or by the authors. We're not going to parse who is responsible for what's on the page in the Torah, but I think just this idea that this is Moses, this is the person who resisted the call, who had every reason to say, I'm not the guy for this job, God, please pick someone else, who does it anyway, who takes the blows, and not just of the enemy, but also by his own people who are ungrateful fetchers every step of the way, who doubt him, who doubt God. He advocates on their behalf again and again, essentially saves their lives more than once. And this is all to get to a place that has been promised that it feels like he's earned the right to touch. He's earned the right to taste. And it just was so hard for me, even as Dov gave his perspective, and I think it's worth hearing it, just for me to sort of get my head around that. And when I put the overlay of the world as it is, I just feel like how not just unsatisfying, but unfair that would be for a leader. And I think about Martin Luther King, who gives this speech that is entirely based on Deuteronomy when that's exactly what Moses, he looks at it, but he's never going to get there. And that's, you know, that's Martin Luther King's incredible words, which my dad always used to quote with such reverence. You know, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I've seen the promised land. I mean, that just, it kills me every time.
I love it. So I'm going to give you a chance to illuminate for us why God may have done that. But I want to put it in a larger frame because I feel Abby often reacts to a text the way many non-Orthodox Jews react to some of our more difficult Torah stories. So I'm thinking of not just that her statement that it was not fair. And I can see her childhood self saying, Mom, that's not fair. You know,
I never sounded like that.
That's her not fair, you know, for God to bar Moses from entering the land with the people he had led with such devotion for so long. She kind of is the voice of modern morality, the intrepid rationalist, you know, outraged by biblical injustice. We have many of those types. Do you ever feel offended or discomforted, you know, when she challenges a sacred text, that's you know, literally written from God, or one of God's acts or rulings that strikes her as unfair, or the behavior of our, you know, let's say it, honestly flawed foremothers and forefathers?
Right.
You're known to be a brilliant teacher, and I'm sure you've had ordinary students who have pushed back. But how does it feel to be the defender of the faith or an apologist for something that may be part of our legacy and of our history, but by today's standards may not be one of our proudest moments?
Wow, so many layers to that. I will start by saying, you know, I did not see myself and don't see myself in this chavruta and in this pair as the defender of the faith. Even though, again, the subtitle, Reform Journalist, Orthodox Rabbi, Abby is not representing Reform Judaism. I'm not representing Orthodox Judaism. We're here as our full selves to bring, you know, our own issues to the text and to one another. I do have a different orientation to it. I believe that it is from God. I hold it sacred. Abby also holds that it's sacred, but in a different way. But I actually see that my responsibility, just generally as a learner, is to be challenging the text. That idea, discuss and debate, that's the essence of Talmudic Judaism. I believe the essence of the partnership of God giving us the Torah and making us responsible for it is that we challenge and ask, and we're always in conversation with the text. I would say that the difference, and Abby has pointed this out, is that I need to start and end with the fact that this is from God and that it's good. So that even when, and that it binds me, so that even when I'm raising questions, like, how does this make any sense? It's not going to come to and why is this fair? And why is this just? And doesn't this seem cruel and against our ethical, values, our ethics? The answer I'm going to not come to is, and therefore I dismiss it. The answer I'm going to come with is, let me figure out how I can resolve that with my belief that this is good and that this is from God. But even when I do that, if I'm doing it with myself, I'm going to let myself off the hook more easily than Abby would let me off the hook. I'll come up with an answer that satisfies me, but it would not satisfy an outside critical voice. And I can give you an illustration of that if you're interested, but that definitely would like to.
But I would just give one other example, Mom, really quickly, which is that, Aaron, who is Moses' brother, has these two sons, and they are just summarily killed when they offer an alien fire, like the wrong sacrifice. And I just felt like they had barely learned how to worship. They had barely learned any of this. And suddenly they don't even get a second chance. And those are the kind of, there are so many, not so many.
What happened to them?
So what, Dov, do you want to elaborate?
Fire comes out and consumes them and they die in a moment of trying to properly, worship God, or to worship God based on their passion and motivation, inspiration. So look, I have to tell you that the conversations at my Shabbos table are similar to this. My son was outraged at this story when he was, 10 years old. And I had some answer that I thought worked. And I said, well, maybe God is trying to demonstrate that even when we have passion and we want to direct it towards worship, we have to control it by what is commanded and by the law, and we can't just act, on our own feelings. And maybe that's really the message here. To which my son responded and he said, if God can start doing that and not acting on his own feelings, and that's exactly the problem here. So, I need those people in my life, like my son, like Abby, that are basically saying, good try, but it's still not good enough.
Maybe I would say maybe it's God's message of controlling, of wanting to control zealotry. Right. But then there's Pinchas, who gets away with it. So how do you distinguish? Because that's always really been bothering me.
Right, and I would even sharpen the question, because the story of Pinchas, just to give the background, is that right on the cusp of entering into the land of Israel, some of the children of Israel the men are fornicating with these Moabite women and worshiping idols, and then Pinchas rises up and takes a spear and pierces through one of the men and one of the women, and God had been sending a plague at the time because to punish the people, and it said at that moment the plague ended. And because Pinchas was zealous for the sake of God. That was the story, and then Pinchas is praised. So exactly, how do we balance that praising with what could be seen as a critique of passion or zealotry in the other story? So, the way I think about it is there are a couple of things. Well, to sharpen first the question, the passion of the sons of Aaron, nobody was being hurt. They were just offering a sacrifice. So it's much more innocuous. Here in Pinchas, it's the zealotry that we all hate. It's one thing you want to be religiously passionate. It's another thing when that translates into violence towards other people who aren't acting the way you believe. So I would say two things. I would say one is that right before Pinchas acts, and we often forget this verse, God says to Moses, take the leaders of the tribes of Israel and judge the people. And basically, you got to reinstill the rule of law here. And God has been sending a plague. So God is actually both already punishing and telling the people, you guys have to step up and act. So it's in that context that Pinchas acts. So that tempers it a little bit. But the more important point I would say is, and this, Abby knows this, that sometimes when there's a really difficult text, the rabbis themselves of the Talmud were aware about how difficult it was, and they would try to soften it. And what the rabbis say is that Pinchas, he could be praised after the fact, but what he did was outside of the law. And if the man that he was coming after had actually turned around and killed him, that man would have been in his rights to kill him as an act of self-defense. That zealotry can never be condoned ahead of time. Afterwards, we might be happy for the results, but it can never be condoned in a society of law.
I mean, look at the machinations that he has to go through.
Okay, that's exactly my lead into you. In this book, I see you as well, I know you so well, but in the book, you are the secular intellectual, the fervent seeker of Jewish learning, the ever-curious and probing journalist, or as we might put it, a professional nitpicker. So, when it comes to Jewish and wisdom literature and ritual observance, you nonetheless Dov as authoritative voice. So I'm struck by how you and Dov meet in this colloquy on an equal plane. And in fact, I don't recall a single passage in the book where Dov challenges your beliefs or practices. To me, that very fact and this book itself embodies something that is sorely missing in the Jewish world: acceptance of difference, mutual respect, and openness to views other than one's own. So you as an organizer, and you as a community leader, and you who keep falling in love with rabbis and traveling to congregations and uplifting our practice, which is the non-Orthodox version. How do you imagine something similar to your and Dov's Chevruta taking root in our community? Or else might your model be replicated in some other way other than Chevruta?
Great question, Mom, and thank you for calling me an intellectual, because I don't consider myself that, and that's not to be self-deprecating. I see myself as the questioner, the sojourner, the traveler, who is so lucky to be able to sort of have this proverbial Rolodex and call people like Dov and say, let's talk about Shmini Atzeret for 2 hours. But I would say that, the thing that I feel that sounds sort of evangelical, although that's the wrong word in this setting, is that I feel so strongly that our teachers are everywhere. And that part of where we cheat ourselves in the Jewish world is to sometimes just stay in our own silos. Our silos are wonderful in the sense that they're home. I'm a member of Central Synagogue since 2006. I'm so glad to have a Jewish home when I didn't grow up with one in that same way, other than my actual literal biological home. It's amazing to have a congregation. It's amazing to know my fellow congregants, to have raised my kids with other people raising their kids together, to walk into a room like Central and feel known and to know others. So all of that is magical. But I sometimes think that like my teachers are there, and they're also outside those walls in many places. And they're sometimes with people I disagree with ideologically, politically, on many things. And I just sometimes sort of see us in our echo chambers, and it's not just that Dov is in the Beit Midrash, since he was in the womb, but it's also just that we sort of think we're hearing from people who are unlike us, but they're not actually that unlike us. And something's lost there. And the disputation that is so much in the DNA of the Jewish people and the Jewish heritage, like sometimes I feel like we sort of lost the thread on how challenging that should be. I think it should be pretty darn challenging. That's where, to me, the light gets in, to go back to those openings, those eurekas, those, I never thought of it that way. And sometimes it's really hard, it's kind of like sandpaper on the soul. But when so it's what I recommend to people is that, yes, you hopefully pick up this book or another one and read the Parsha of the week with someone and talk about it. And maybe it's your spouse and maybe it's your best friend, but maybe it's also someone who you don't necessarily think you vote the same way, or you maybe come from very different experiences. Like this is just where things are alive. And I think people, there's so many Talmudic examples I know of rabbis who said, I don't want to keep studying with the person who agrees with me. I want to study with the person who disagrees.
Right. Dov, I'm going to give you an easy route to an answer because I'm going to give you a specific example of your own outreach and given the strictures of Orthodoxy, you have found ways within halakha, Jewish law, to expand women's role in Judaism.
Mhm.
I hope you'll be able to conjure some examples of those advances and not be modest about it. And I hope you'll also reflect on how your wife, Devorah, who you've discussed in the context of your dedication, may have contributed to raising your consciousness or broadening your perspective about Judaism and gender. For those who don't know Devorah, I might mention that she is a feminist, an outspoken feminist, and a revered teacher, and a Talmud scholar, and a spiritual guide in the most credentialed sense of the word in her own right. So let's talk about ways in which you have somehow or other produced change, but not left the derech, not left the road.
Thank you. I really appreciate the question and the opportunity. You know, Abby has shared about a what I think can call a traumatic experience that you had, Letty, when you were saying Kaddish, and the opportunity for women to say Kaddish in an Orthodox synagogue, that their voice should be heard from the other side of a mechitza, you know, has in the past was so taboo, and it pushed so many women away when they at the most, you know, difficult time of their lives. I think that one of the things that the rabbinical school that I had, Chovevei Torah, has really distinguished itself is in terms of creating as much opportunity as possible within an Orthodox setting, with the mechitza, with men and women on different sides, but for women's voices and roles to be present within the synagogue. And it was, you know, one of the things that I have insisted with our students, which I learned from Rabbi Avi Weiss, who is the founder of Chovevei Torah, is that the divider always be immediately like straight down in the middle. In many Orthodox synagogues, you know, 90% is the men's space and 10% is the women's, and the message of marginality is immediately there. And even though we had a school of like 40 students, men, I should say, it's still a men's rabbinical school. It was only, you know, 12 years ago, Maharat, that gives smicha to women, Orthodox smicha to women, began. So even though a school filled with men, when it came time for the davening, for the prayer services, we erected a mechitza down the middle, even if there was only none or one woman on the other side, because of that symbolism. So that's a small example. I'll add to that, you know, that, and again, I'm not sure how much this is something that everybody here in the audience is sensitive to, but this is a reality in the Orthodox community. The way, when there were no women around in synagogue, men would just go on the women's side of the mechitza as well. And if a woman would come, the one would be, oh, okay, fine, we'll move, we'll make room for you. And the message is, this is all male space. You're only here at our leave, and, you know, your presence is a burden. So the other sort of rule that we have, and they've carried this forth in the synagogues that they have led and that they lead, is I don't care if there's no women on the women's side, no men are allowed there during services. Even if you got to get a book, you're not allowed there. So that's just some examples, but it makes a very big difference in terms of the sense of women as equal members, you know, of the institution.
And now about Devorah's role in your raised consciousness.
Yeah, you know, I would say that it's similar to what I was talking about a minute ago about when I, as a privileged male rabbi, think that I'm being sensitive and I've raised an issue and I've come to a good resolution. I need somebody else to tell me, like, yeah, that good try, but it's not enough. And it's very easy for, again, as a man who has these privileges, for me to feel like I've solved a problem. And, you know, Devorah was constantly that voice that like made me realize what it looked like from the women's perspective and from her perspective, and make me realize that I might want religiously to feel I've resolved a problem, but I am sacrificing something on the human level when I feel that it's all done with and resolved, and that I have to let the problem remain, because if I don't acknowledge that the problem is still there, you know, whether it's like women's ability in leadership and halacha and opportunities and how I solve the theological questions, then I've made my peace with it, and no more change will happen.
Okay, quick PS to this discussion. Have you had any pushback from your community or any hesitation in yourself about embarking on this project, the book, when, like it or not, it is not exactly de rigueur for an Orthodox man and woman who are unrelated to one another to be in regular public Torah conversation?
Right.
And without a lashon hara about your community, let's hear that.
Yeah, so I would say, Beth, because of the rabbinical school that I hold and the position that it's in, and that we stand for an orthodoxy that's more open and that's more about building bridges and not building walls, which has sadly been a lot of what orthodoxy has been about. A lot of people are very happy with that and thrilled about what that represents, and a lot of mainstream and right-wing Orthodox feel that that's illegitimate. They are happy with the orthodoxy they have. So we've already been, for the people that would be against what this is about, have already given up on me, many years ago. But that being said, I will say that even if people in the community, I didn't hear flack from those that are part of my natural community. I don't know if they would have expected it. I think that they were, maybe surprised. As you said, spending all of this time, that's one thing to have a single conversation, but all this time, woman, not your wife, not Orthodox, talking Torah. But they were very pleased. They would tell me, I've listened to the podcast, I read the book. It was so eye-opening. I do want to say one thing that I was afraid of pushback. And this came out, this surprised Abby, it surprised me when we were being interviewed right after the book came out, and somebody from the forward, and the question is, so I understand you're going to be going around on a book tour to Reform and conservative synagogues on Shabbat. And I said, oh, please don't print that. And she said, why, what's the matter? And all of a sudden I realized that talking Torah was one thing, but in the Orthodox community, for an Orthodox rabbi to be at a Reform synagogue on Shabbat, even if all the halachic issues are right, even if all the halachic issues are addressed, it's a shanda. How can you really be Orthodox and be at a Reform synagogue? It's an identity issue. And I decided after that I really have to own it. And that this is actually what we most desperately need. Because when we've been there, the community was so appreciative of my presence. And there's a lot of healing that needs to be done because we have not been doing that.
Ooh, amazing. Thank you. Abby, let's dig in a little deeper on your conflicts and contradictions. After years of collaborating with an Orthodox rabbi, do you see his influence in your own Judaism? You've been the president of Central Synagogue, for 3 or 4 years? It's one of the largest Reform synagogues in the country. It has a rabbi who's internationally known, and she happens to be a Jew who happens to be a Korean American, and a she. You've published books about secular Jews and how they feel about Judaism. You're looking at the different ways that communities celebrate and commemorate Jewish holidays. You are a true multiple world view person. Has Dov inspired you to move a step or two in the direction of greater observance, or perhaps challenge the way you think about God?
Just some small questions. I think the answer is yes, and I haven't really been as honest about it. I certainly haven't said so much publicly or even to Dov. I feel like there's certain ways that the ship has sailed in terms of what kind of Jew I'm going to be, even as I keep learning and keep deepening my practice and investigation. But what I think Dov has taught me, and what I admire so much, is it's not just that he is oriented in his kind of Jewish schedule in a much stricter way. And I feel like there's something reassuring and anchoring about that in a way that I envy, with my life being a lot more kind of, we call it cafeteria style Judaism. I will do this, but then I won't do that. I'll fast on this year. Then I won't. I always fast for Yom Kippur, but the idea that I did all 6 fasts when I was doing my book, and then I stopped doing those, the other 5, like for me, I can pick and choose. And he really can't, and according to just the choices he's made in his life. And I really think there's something profound about that, and not necessarily constricting, but in some way, as I said, sort of anchoring and orienting, and also kind of, the priorities are just clear. Like they speak for themselves. Whereas mine are always going to be a little bit more kind of like what I'm in the mood for. And that's not something I'm beating myself up about. But the time that I did actually turn off my phone for Shabbat completely changed my week in a way that I wish I had maintained. It's hard to do Shabbat alone. It's hard to do Shabbat when your husband's kind of like, why aren't you picking up? Or my mother used to say, like, why are you picking up your phone? It's like, Mom, I'm trying to do this. Why aren't you reachable on a Saturday? But I just see how I don't see myself becoming an Orthodox Jew, nor do I judge anyone who chooses that. That's just not happening. But I do see that orienting around a sense of the Jewish schedule is powerful. And the last piece I will say is God, is the idea that God is in everything every day for Dov. And I have a great, and I would say very profound, unshakable faith, but it isn't so much that I'm commanded. And that language that Dov has not just explained to me, but that comes up every time we talk about a Parsha is just, it's much more challenging and alive, and I think important than many of us who are more secular Jews have explored.
Talk about a raised consciousness. He's done that for you. Before we go to questions, which we'll do after this, is a question I want to ask of both of you. It's inspiring to read how you've reached across the denominational divide, for your partnered study of the Torah. But I can't help wondering if your families would ever socialize Jewishly. In other words, would you, Abby, feel comfortable at Dov's Shabbat table? And would you, Dov, feel comfortable at our family Seder, at which my daughter has been our esteemed leader for years? I always want her to wear my father's kittel, but she hasn't gone that far.
Well, I guess I'll go first.
Yeah.
I think if I'm imagining myself at your Seder, I think I'm excited about the opportunity because it's going to be out of my normal experience and really interested for the dynamics and the ideas that are going to be a part of it. The one thing, going back to Abby's point, that's going through my head is like, wait a minute, I'm going to have a chance to do all of the mitzvahs at the right time. Will I be eating matzah at the right time? Will I be making these brachas? Will I be doing this? Maybe what I'll have to do is I'll have to do the Seder myself personally beforehand and then come to your Seder. So I'm thinking the whole halachic equation, which is a different equation than the actual enjoying of the experience. And it happened when I was at this temple. Remind me what the name?
Atlanta. We were in Atlanta at Sinai. Yeah.
Temple Sinai. I went to the Friday night services and I really enjoyed it. I was actually pleasantly surprised. It was very familiar, very traditional. Obviously, there were differences. And then afterwards, I said to Abby, when people were going to dinner, I said, Abby, you're going to have to excuse me for 10 minutes because I'm going to have to go do my own davening now, my own prayers now. So it's a balancing act. But I would really enjoy the opportunity. And Abby sort of maybe intuited what you were going to ask, because the other night she reached out to me and said, hey, would you and Dvorah like to go out to dinner with Dave and me one of these nights? So there you go.
That was actually Dave's idea.
Oh, good for Dave.
Well, I have to say, Dov, that you would enjoy our Seders immensely, but you might consider them theater in some way. If you can have a granddaughter of yours put on a red skirt and open her legs and call it the opening of the Red Sea.
Oh,
it was a long time ago, Mom, when they were like 5.
He was 4, I think.
I do have to say, when my kids were small, we actually enacted the whole Exodus story, and everybody had roles, and Dvorah would hide behind the couch, and she would be the voice of God. But she couldn't, but she could not play Moses or Pharaoh because she was a woman, so she couldn't play a man's role, but she could play God.
Maybe she was just the Shekhinah.
Exactly.
Okay, Abby, how would you answer?
So just very quickly, I would love to have Dov at our Seder, but I do think I would stress. The thing about being at Dov and Dvorah's table, I'll be honest, I would be a little intimidated, because I feel like all of my ignorance would be shown up. And it's not that I don't know the prayers or can't say them as fast. But I think this is just something I'm calling out that I think a lot of people feel is when you walk into a space that's not your Jewish space, you suddenly are the rookie, kind of among experts. And that said, I love them both, and I've interviewed Devorah too. So I would flip things after the prayers and just start asking them a lot of questions.
Well, I have to say, I have had Shabbat dinner at the home of Blue and Yitz Greenberg, who have been my heroes for more than 50 years. I worked for Yitz when I was at Brandeis, and he was our Hillel Rabbi, and I met Blue as a young Rebbitzin. And I have gone there, and I have made a mistake every single time. I don't remember in the rachatz, the hand washing, I forgot that you're not supposed to speak after that. And then I forgot the order in which the three main blessings took place. I mean, I just got nervous, just as you said. And I think we as Jews need to realize that in some version of that, we have people at our Seder, which I think is very accessible. And some people are going to feel weird, like they didn't do this, they don't know this. What does this mean? No matter how much you make it lively and funny and you act out the building of the pyramids or whatever you do. There are people who are going to feel alien, and maybe we have to all think more fully and humanely about how to make people feel at home. Because
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think Abraham and Sarah knew how
yeah,
to do
the welcoming.
the welcome, and we lost it. So if you could give me a quick view, Suzanne, of the question.
First of all, thank you all. That was a phenomenal conversation. Phenomenal. Someone wanted to know, were there things in the Torah that you never read about or heard of before?
Dov, anything surprise you?
Well, I have been reading the Torah pretty consistently every single week for the last, 45 years. So, but I did have new insights that I had not had before. And particularly, I mentioned this in the introduction, when we get to the end and it talks about the king writing a Torah and keeping it by him all the days. Abby said, I love this parsha. It's about being a lifelong learner. And I'm saying, like, what are you talking about? Like, it's right there. He has the Torah. He reads it all the time. And to me, it was always about recognizing that God is above. Even if you're the king, you're not the ultimate authority. Everybody is under law. And that was just like one example about how a reading that Abby took for granted, to me, was a completely new insight and a new reading of the text.
Thank you. I want to just give a shout out to Anita in Detroit, because we're going there, and she wrote a very nice note. And she said, "You look great, Mom."
Why am I not seeing anything?
I think you're not able to click on Q&A, but it's okay because Suzanne can ask the questions.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Abby,
Okay.
was there anything that surprised you in your learning?
Oh God, everything surprised me. And even though I had read the Torah before, I had never read it like this. And I would say one thing that really did surprise me, and in a way moved me, was just this idea that God evolves. That God isn't necessarily in the same place in Genesis that God is when we get to the last book of Deuteronomy, and the idea of just watching that kind of arc. And I don't want to say growth. It sounds like who am I to say that God grows? But you kind of see that everyone's figuring it out, and that's just such a profound idea.
Thank you. Somebody wrote
I
in.
see.
Oh,
I
go ahead.
see Davida Charney. I finally found it, and I really relate to your question, Davida. There have been conflicts between different branches and streams of Judaism for over 2,000 years. What's different now is the fundamentalism that has emerged from some Haredim. This sometimes violent insistence that they have the one exclusive correct reading seems deeply contradictory to the methods of Talmud. What responses might be effective that are politically or diplomatically possible? Very, very
Wow.
terse, clear. What do you
Wow.
say, Joe?
I guess a short answer would be, that I think that when we're historically, before the denominations, when we didn't feel threatened, it created more sense of security and to have open dialogue and raise all questions under the sun. And I think now, some people, because of the way denominational politics have played out, are not prepared to entertain other ways of other perspectives because they're just very threatening. And that leads to this type of dogmatism that I don't think has been naturally a part of Judaism and the Jewish enterprise. I don't really have any brilliant solutions, but I think it is a more of a modern phenomenon, modern in the sense of the last 200 years.
I want to go to Anita Ehrenfried's question next. She says, I have a massive problem with the mechitzot, with the mechitza, the divider. As a reconservadox Jew, that's how I was raised, exactly that way. Why do you insist on keeping it down the middle or not? If you can accept women in the Orthodox Rabbinate, well, the Orthodox Rabbinate doesn't exactly accept
Right.
women, but may I say about the mechitza? I just came back from Lebanon, and not Lebanon, sorry, Lisbon, and that's an interesting slip, from a vacation and a hiking trip in Portugal, and I happened to, by accident, schedule this hiking trip when it was Yom Kippur. I had no idea because I don't live by Jewish time. I don't have a Jewish calendar on my wall like my parents did. So I never looked, and lo and behold, it was Yom Kippur, and I was in Lisbon. And so for months beforehand, I had to find a synagogue. And I had to find a place that would take me in for Kol Nidre dinner because I was going to fast the next day. And I love our people because usually you can sort of hit the ground running, find a Jewish home to be in, find a synagogue, but I couldn't find one without a mechitza, Dov. And I cannot viscerally, physically behind a mechitza. So I did finally find a tiny little egalitarian shtibel with a Aron HaKodesh, a holy ark, 4 Torahs in it, a yad, I told you, one with a broken finger. But it was a beautiful little community. And because they had so few people who knew Hebrew, I guess, I even got an aliyah. That feeling, if I'd been behind a mechitza, none of that would have happened. I would never have felt so close to Judaism.
Right.
Can you tell what mom is feeling here? It's coming through, right?
Yeah, I think I get the sense. Look, there's absolutely no question that the mechitza has led to the marginal, has made women feel marginalized, pushed them out. And I would even say that nowadays there's another problem that it's introduced, which is with our greater awareness and about queer identity. And then the mechitza instantiates two genders, male and female. Where does a queer Jew sit if they want to go to an Orthodox synagogue? So it definitely comes with a lot of costs and a lot of ways in which it's pushing people out. There's no question about it. It's one of the things that has just been a staple within Orthodoxy. And I have to say, it gets sort of to my point about the challenge of going and spending a Shabbat at a Reformed synagogue. There are some areas where there's opportunities within halacha, and there are other areas which halacha, the way I understand it, can't go that far. And then there are things where there's a question about that they're just seeing so much in terms of identity markers that it almost is not a beginning conversation, right? Right now, to have a conversation about, is there a halachic way of rethinking mechitza? It's like, it doesn't matter yes or no. That just makes you not Orthodox. That's the way the identity has been constructed. So, that's a sad reality. And we do our best to try to figure out how do we create maximum inclusiveness and membership, even with that.
Okay, thank you.
Letty, I have one question that somebody wrote in prior to the program. Traditional Jews believe Torah is divinely ordained. Many conservative and Reformed Jews do not. We believe Torah is more a well-written story. What is your opinion? And how does this conflict between science and God affect the coherence and survival of the Jewish people?
I love these very specific.
We have no time for that question.
Local questions.
This is the moment. These are the moment readers that we.
These are the moment readers. The smart. It's 1:30, and we need a half an hour for that question. I will just say to whoever's asked it, by the way, that I am moderating, not to promote another event, but I'm moderating an entire conversation on science and religion with David Wolpe and Brian Green and Rochelle Walensky from CDC, November 13th, if anyone's interested, November 12th. But
So then-
I don't, if you
We'll,
want
we'll
to,
save it for then, unless you have a quick
Yeah.
quick response. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank Rabbi Linzer, Abigail, and Letty. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. People have already said they're reading the book. Again, the book is called It Takes Two to Torah. I've put a link in the chat. We'll also send a follow-up email that will have a link for you to purchase it, as well as the website. Rabbi Linzer, do you want to tell everybody what the website is?
Yeah, it's www.ittaks2totorah.com, so very easy. And you can find excerpts from the books and links to past and upcoming events where we're going to be going on our book tour. So check that out.
Fantastic. And Abigail, if you want to send me a link to where people can register for your program on science in a few weeks, I'm happy to include that
thank you.
as well.
And I will do that. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Mom, because thank you for your preparation.
Yes. Thank you, Letty. It's wonderful to be interviewed by you.
Generosity.
And I want to thank the audience for joining us. If everyone can go to momentmag.com, you can learn more about the programs that we offer in the coming weeks. You can watch past programs and you can subscribe to the magazine. Again, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.